Okay, today is August the 27th, 2007, and we're here in the Angie DeBow room of the OSU Library. Mr. Cecil Wildman, who graduated in
59.
From Oklahoma State University.
Civil engineering.
Okay. Has agreed to come back for a second interview with us. We learned in the course of our conversations and everything after the first interview that he's had some interesting career experiences that were somewhat significant for the town of Stillwater and for Oklahoma State University. Could you tell us a little bit about your career in the early 1960s?
In 1962, I was given the position of the area engineer for the Soil Conservation Service in the Perry office. I was in charge of 18 flood control watersheds in 9 counties. And one of my counties was Payne County, and one of the watersheds was Stillwater Creek. So every Monday morning, I would drive to Stillwater. I would pick up officials of the Water Association and the upstream flood control officials. And we would take maps of the projects and we'd go to the landowners to get easements. That was the second stage, and those watershed programs were very, very popular at that time, and it started in Oklahoma. The first ones were built on Washita Creek out by Washita River out by Cheyenne.
And were these funded, were they federally funded?
They were federally funded, all of them in the state, except if you wanted, a city wanted additional water for municipal water supply. And about the first 2 in the state, I was the engineer on them. One of the reasons I was promoted to that job was the Stillwell and Salisal. And then Stillwater Creek Watershed Authority wanted to put extra water in Lake McMurtry for the city of Stillwater. So the way that worked, the federal government paid for all the flood control dams in the county and all these watersheds, except in the case of Stillwater, they had to pay extra for the amount of water that they wanted to put in that lake for additional water supply for the city of Stillwater. Otherwise, it's all federal money.
Where does the water in Stillwater Creek originate from?
Well, it didn't a big watershed. Lake Carl Blackwell is on Stillwater Creek. But if you go north to Meta Park, just straight north of town, you're not even in Stillwater watershed anymore.
Oh.
It's fairly short north. It goes west past Lake Carl Blackwell, then it goes on into the river of Perkins. But it's a rather small watershed, but it's a tough one. It always flooded.
Oh.
One of the worst flooded watersheds in Oklahoma.
And what time of the year would be common for it to experience flooding issues?
April. Stillwater flooded big in 1957 in April. School was still going on. Yeah. And it flooded again in 59.
Were you a student during that time period?
I was in 57 when it flooded, yes. And it was the first watershed dam built on Stillwater Creek. Protected the area south of the Pizza Hut that goes down through where I was showing the boy that picked me up, down around McDonald Street and down that bottom. Those houses were underwater. So the first one built was Professor Hazen owned 160 acres of land north of there. So you can visualize about 2 miles north of Lakeview. I mean, not 2 miles north. About 2.5 blocks north. And about 2.5 blocks west of Lakeview on Monroe. Can you visualize that one?
Yes.
First one, it's a big one there, west of those houses. That was the first one built on Stillwater Creek because it was needed, and he signed an easement almost immediately.
And that was shortly after the big flood?
Well, I was only there 2.5 years in Perry, and I came down every Monday in 63 and 64.
And who were the people that you met with when you came down? You said you met with several officials?
Sam Myers was official here in Stillwater. He had married one of the Berry girls, and he had an office downtown. And he was kind of a big, he ran for mayor a couple of times and wasn't elected. Lawrence Ham was a farmer I'm gonna back up. Lesterham was his brother. Lesterham was a farmer west of town. Everybody liked him. And so I would pick those two guys up and we'd meet at the county SCS office in downtown Stillwater with Bill McMurtry. Bill McMurtry was an elderly man in charge of the office. Lake McMurtry is named after him. So the four of us would go out to a landowner's home and I'd get the maps out and would explain how big the dam was, the area of it, how much flood water it would hold, and all that. And we'd ask him for an easement. Mm-hmm. And Chilton Swank, by the way, all these people are dead now. Mm-hmm. Chilton Swank was the attorney. He was a really nice hotshot attorney and was down Stillwater. We'd take the easements to him, and basically I wasn't involved as a federal employee as actually getting that easement signed. These other guys were, and then they give it to Chilton and he'd record it. And then that would allow the planning engineers to come in and plan that lake. And then the construction office was also in Perry, had a construction engineer that worked for me, and he came in and he was in charge of building them.
So if you could clarify for me, your role then was to develop the plans and get all of the paperwork and maps and things together?
No, I was probably pretty much a public relations engineer. I was prior to this job, I was a planning engineer on several watersheds. I worked out of Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. They had an engineer, a geologist, and an economist. And we would go to a watershed that people would ask for us to study. And we would locate the dams. And the geologist would tell us whether we could build it out of the dirt that was there, and the economist would say what it's worth building as far as the government spending the money. And then they turned that over. Those maps were in a booklet and sent it to Congress. Congress approved it for the money. Mm-hmm. Then they sent those to an area office, and then I was promoted. And I had 3 engineers who worked under me. But I had the authority to go to these towns, and I was kind of on my own. You know, I wasn't just, I'd pick these guys up. We'd eat lunch together. We'd talk about it. We'd try to get the easements and try to satisfy the people. When that was done, then the construction engineer, which was a large office in Perry, mm-hmm. they would take over those plans and award the contracts and supervise the construction. I really was hands off at that time. Mm-hmm. But that's what I was actually administrative pretty much by that time.
Okay. Okay, and then you had a story about a particular dam that we were interested in hearing about today on Hall of Fame in Western.
Yes, several people have asked me over the years about that, and no one seems to know much about it. But you can understand they wouldn't know much about it because I'm the only one living that was involved. But Dr. Wildman was a real popular president here. And as far as I know, everybody really liked him. So one day, they called me, this Bill McMurtry probably called me, and he said, we got to meet with Dr. Wildman. And I said, well, that's kind of strange, meeting with the president of the college. He said, yeah, I got to meet him out here where is that the food services on that corner of Hall of Fame and Western. And Western was an old dirt road, if you remember. It wasn't open, and it was open, but wasn't paved, and people didn't use it much. He met me out there, and he said, I want a dry dam here. I don't want a dam to hold water. And I told him, I said, that's pretty unusual. And he said, well, he says, that's what I want. He said, I want to, and I thought about it later. He wanted to protect those people below there, and it really does a great job. But I told him I was going to talk him out of it. So he said, okay, you and I are going to walk up to McElroy and leave everybody else here. Well, it's a dirty, old, windy day. Dust was blowing, and he had a dark suit and a tie and all that. And I was trying to explain to him that it would be a nice lake, and the college would own it, and we'd have to build a road around Western, but it would be pretty there. He said, well, you haven't talked me out of anything. By the time we got back to the corner, he said, no, it's going to be a dry dam. And he said, any problems with that? And I said, no, if you want a dry dam, it's going to be a dry dam. And I might explain that to people that don't understand if I can do this simple.
Okay.
Assume you got a bathtub full of water and it's flowing over the top, and you keep running the faucet in there, it's going to flow over the top. Eventually, if you turn the faucet off, it'll settle down to the overflow. It'll settle down, then it'll stay in that tub and go out this overflow, and you got about that much distance between that and the top. That's the way most flood control dams are today. They hold this, what we call the permanent pool of water. If you reach down and pull the plug out of the bottom, it's going to drain the whole thing. Well, that one has got a plug in the bottom that stays open. So it can fill up during a heavy flood, but it immediately is trying to drain out. And it takes 2-3 weeks, they tell me sometimes, for it to drain out, instead of all that water rushing down that creek. So it was a good thing. I think he probably did a wise thing. That was, but it's very interesting because today you'd never have a president of a college do a meaningless job like that, would you? I mean, he'd have 5 staff people out there talking and probably a couple of attorneys, but he was out there himself. Mm-hmm. And a nice person. I always remember that when I go over that dam to this day, like he was talking, I still remember that trip we took. Mm-hmm. But that was his idea, nobody else's.
Did he have an engineering background? How did he?
No, I don't think so. He was a farm guy, and he was from Randolph, Oklahoma, if I remember. And he was sharp, and he worked all the time. But I'm sure he had asked some people before we got out there, mm-hmm. some of the details. Mm-hmm. And all I had to do at that particular time was just say, okay, it's going to be dry. I had the authority to say it'd be drier. And when I submitted it to the design section here in Stillwater, and then the planning and the construction engineers just built it.
Were dry dams unusual for this area at that time?
Yeah, that would probably be 1 out of 50 maybe of that crew, and it would be an unusual situation because most people wanted the water, and these area dams around here are pretty. You know, if you've been around them, they're nice lakes, mm-hmm. and most people wanted them. It was a little unusual. It was only one on Stillwater Creek that we even had a request for.
Mm-hmm. Well, how many dams are there on Stillwater Creek?
You know, there's a plan available in the SCS archives that mm-hmm. shows all of those. And I'd have to guess. One of the first watersheds I worked on when I was going to college, I worked for the SCS in Western Oklahoma in the summer times. One of the first watersheds I worked on out in Western Oklahoma was Barnett's Creek, and it had 62 dams. So it's a lot. I'm going to guess Stillwater's down in the category about 25. It was a smaller watershed than those big ones, but very critical because this area always flooded. There was an article in the Date Oklahoma about a month ago that was very interesting that told how well those things have worked all over the state of Oklahoma. Did y'all read that article?
I didn't.
They ran a special on it. It said there wasn't any of them failed. Mm-hmm. They all worked. They're talking about all the way from the Texas line to the Arkansas line. That historically, in these floods, those things have worked real well.
Why was Oklahoma at the forefront of this, do you think? Did we have some legislators or some politicians that were very involved in this?
And there was a guy by the name of Red Mayo who was a banker at Cheyenne, and he was one of the first people that got the congressmen and the people interested in the Ouachita River. And it was the first big watershed project in the United States. Well, then they just kind of caught a hold, and there's lots of money came in. Then all of a sudden, I think you may ask me this later, if they're building them today, the Congress doesn't allocate any money. They didn't get them all built, but they've dried up those funds. And I think if you went out to work on one of them today, the Soil Conservation Service would hire private consultants to do whatever they needed to do. But that program, I understand, has no funds in it as of today. Mm-hmm. For construction.
Okay. Your recommendation had been to make a lake there, and you saw the benefits to this being just the beauty or the recreation possibilities?
Yes, and because most all the rest of them wanted a lake. Mm-hmm. And I even described to him how I thought it would cover up Western permanently. Mm-hmm. But the SCS would build a road around the west side, and it'd just be a pretty thing. But he was primarily interested in flood control, and I think he did the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether people complain about that thing or not, but it works. It isn't real pretty, because out there today you'd have to mow the grass, and there's no water in it, but it sure works.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised when he said that he wanted to take a walk with you and
Yeah, I
discuss
was,
this a little
because
more?
yeah, here's president of the college, and I thought, well, got all these wheels here in Stillwater standing around there, and they were a little bit concerned. I think they didn't want to tackle him with a bunch of stuff, and it kind of caught me by surprise. But that's okay. We had a good argument.
Mm-hmm.
And I always kind of cherished the fact that I told him, fine, let's build the dry dam.
Mm-hmm.
You might want to ask me a little bit about, or I might volunteer a little bit about Karsten Creek.
Okay. One other thing I do want to ask you, though, did you have any other contact with Dr. Wilhelm through the years, and did you and he ever discuss the dry dam?
I think a couple of times at receptions and places that I was invited to, I just shook hands with him, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a short deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was here too much longer. And you got to realize, I quit that job. I mean, right in the middle of all that, I never did see any of those. I wasn't responsible for any of the construction.
Mm-hmm.
I was there 2.5 years in Perry, and I was offered the state engineer Farmers Home Administration here in Stillwater in May of '64, and we were just getting started on the construction in Stillwater Creek.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned it all over to other people that replaced me, and had a great job with Farmers Home for 20 years. I was in the USDA building.
Mm-hmm.
So I got away from it, from all of that. Except I drank coffee with the SDS engineers out the USDA building twice a day, because we'd work together.
Mm-hmm.
I had literally no follow-up much on any of those projects.
Okay. I would like to hear about Karsten.
Well, a lot of people don't know a lot about Carson. It's not a real interesting story, but it kind of is too. There was Lawrence Ham owned that. He was a farmer that owned. There was 80 acres there on that corner as you drive out 51, and he told me he had purchased it from two elderly women that came to Stillwater and wanted to get rid of that 80 acres. He told me he had to come to town and borrow the money and he had trouble doing that, but he got it bought. Well, some got in his head the lake wasn't going to be very big. So I'm sitting in the office in Perry, and he comes in there very upset. I don't know him. He's very upset. And he says, I'm really concerned this lake's going to be a mud puddle. And I said, well, Lawrence, I said, we're putting extra water in there. You build them bigger when you're protecting the highway. Those lakes are a bit bigger. You also build them bigger if you can irrigate out of them. Well, he could irrigate out of that one, and also Highway 51, you have to protect it. So he said, I believe they call those Class A structures. And I said, it's bigger than the normal one. And you know what the others look like? I said, it's going to be a bigger dam and a bigger lake, because we've got to protect Highway 51. He left me, and then in the meantime, here I'm leaving the agency. He comes back again about 2 weeks later, and he's real upset again. And he said, I just don't think I'm going to like this lake. And I said, well, Lawrence, I said, I've been thinking about it. And I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I've got the top inspectors in Oklahoma working for me. One of them is a local Stillwater high school grad that you've known all your life. I'm going to assign him as inspector on this lake. And it's your baby and his baby that says, Bill, because I'm not going to be around. And he said, that suits me fine. So probably a year later, or 2 years later, I was downtown drinking coffee one Saturday morning, and it was built. And he came up and he said, that's a beautiful lake. I want you to come out Sunday and want to drive around and show it to you. For 10 years, he told me I never did go out there on Sunday. I was busy, and he said, it's just great. I want you to drive out. I want to spend showing you that sucker, and never did go out. I haven't seen it to this day.
Oh, you haven't?
No. But he was very upset about that originally.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me later that he and that inspector stayed out there and they watched that contractor, and they said he built a beautiful lake. And very few people would have any idea that that's the way that even got started. Okay, he sold it, and I think it was a catfish farm, I think. And then the Gulf people took it over, and part of that ended up being Carson Creek. But they called it Hams Lake when it was built.
Mm-hmm.
And that Boomer was part of Stillwater Creek flood control.
Boomer Lake
Boomer,
was?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some pretty interesting lakes built just to protect Stillwater.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've done a pretty good job.
Was there any community reaction one way or the other to any of the projects?
I'm thinking at that time that the people in Stillwater and the officials thought it was a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
There has been some of the communities around Oklahoma that have fought that program because the landowners would not give the easements and cover up their wheat fields and what have you. Some of them have failed to go toward completion because of that. This never were built. This was a popular project because Stillwater had flooded, and always is. Stillwater sits on a creek.
Oh.
It's down in a hole. So it's probably one of the most volatile towns in Oklahoma for flooding. But it really wasn't bad this summer, and I'm sure these flood control dams helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. We had a lot of rain this year.
There's a big one north of town by that little golf course that they built on the west side. It's one of the last ones built. A couple miles north on the west side, there's a pretty big dam there. Have a
Lake
batting cage. They have batting cages and stuff below
Neurohr Park.
Whoa.
it. Yeah. See, that one that's one of the newest ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then McMurtry and Karsten and Boomer, that catches lots of water and lets it out easy.
Mm-hmm. But what is the water supply for the Stillwater, the town of Stillwater now, the city of Stillwater?
The big now is called Reservoir Pump City.
Mm-hmm.
Lake Carl Blackwell can serve water to Stillwater, and so can McMurtry. They were both designed to sell water to Stillwater. And Blackwell did for years and years and years, and then they never did really develop McMurtry. And so Perry comes in and gets about half the water rights at McMurtry. A lot of people are critical of that happening. But right now they have a 30-inch big water main to call. I'm going to guess that is about 20 years old. No, it's probably 30 years old now. Yeah, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And our conversations before, Bill Thomas was the mayor of Stillwater. His brother owns Thomas Ford. His dad owned Thomas Ford. Bill went 100 miles an hour and was a great mayor, but he didn't let anybody get in his way. He was a pushy guy, and he was wanting to build that 30-inch water line to call. That was his baby, and build a water treatment plant here at Stillwater. So Stillwater would own the plant and operate it and all that. He appointed myself and Carl Reed and the head of the civil engineering department, Bill Birchie. Parcher was head of the civil engineering. I couldn't think of his name. He's dead now. As advisors to the city council for a year. And I met with the city council for a year. And I liked Bill. He liked me. But he ran the city council meetings like a dictator, which was okay. And the vote passed very, very low percentage to build that. I mean, a lot of people were opposed to that because it raised their rates and taxes and all that stuff. But that was pretty much took all the water out of Blackwell and McMurtry as needs for Stillwater.
Do you remember what year that was, approximately?
I'm going to say it was approximately 30 years ago. Okay. So what would that be? 70. I was still state engineer for Farmers Home, and I retired from that job in '84.
Okay.
So I was still there.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe around 1980, 79, 80.
Okay.
That was our new water supply for Stillwater.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell that it's made a difference in the growth of Stillwater?
Yes, I think, and the politicians ought to be telling the story instead of me, but all those developers, all those big plants on Perkins,
Mhm.
they were just starting, and they gave Stillwater an ultimatum. You got to get a guaranteed water supply, or we're not going to build here. And I can't remember what they all are. National Standard, Mercury Marine, all those were coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And they really pushed big time for that. And I think it allowed Stillwater just to bloom.
Mm-hmm.
Every realtor in town voted for that vote that came up. It didn't pass by a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but people wanted that bad. And it's been an assured supply.
And you could see the significance of that at that time.
Yes, I think that they gave Stillwater an ultimatum
Mm-hmm.
that you do something, because they just didn't want to rely on Lake Carl Blackwell and Lake McMurtry for water.
Mm-hmm.
And so Stillwater bowed their necks and did that.
Mm-hmm.
I argued with Bill almost every day. He'd come over here and drink coffee with me at the USD building, and I argued with him all the time about the fact is, if we'd have built the plant at Ponca City, we could have sold water to Ponca City, Perry, Morrison, the water districts, and everybody between here and Ponca. And he said, I want the water treatment plant in Stillwater, and I want the Stillwater people to run it, and that's what it's going to be. And we argued all the time about it.
Mm-hmm.
Friendly arguments. We drank a cup of coffee. Argued with him a year about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a friendly argument.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned the dry dam and talking about the significance of it for the homes, what neighborhoods or streets are you talking about that you feel like that helped?
If you can visualize off of Farm Road by the vet, that creek goes through all those homes,
Mm-hmm.
going to south end of Stillwater on Stillwater Creek. I didn't ever live out there, but I understand that was always a problem. This dam, I understand, has literally solved that problem.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard anyone complain, and they claim it takes it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to drain out of there after a flood, and those people just have a creek. Before, it would have rushed down through there.
Many of them probably don't know.
They don't even know the
story
dams.
or-
They don't even know the dam's there. Don't even know why it's there. Don't even know. They just know they don't flood.
Mm-hmm.
Those houses, probably half of them, are sold.
Hmm.
And the last thing they'd even think about, well, there's a flood control dam up there protecting us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think I see the group of students that practice archery over there on the south side of that dam when I go home a lot, and they probably have no idea.
And they have for years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other students I see doing stuff. I was thinking one time, I shouldn't even say it, seemed like there was one time there's even shooting into that thing, some kind of class.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe a riflery.
Yeah,
or
small deal, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any other noteworthy projects in OSU or the Stillwater area that you want to mention that we haven't talked about?
Well, I might just mention something. We won't have to go in details at all. You know, Stillwater's surrounded by water districts, and none of them were built prior to '64. We experienced. I was a state engineer for the whole state when I came to, and this isn't about me, but I had all 77 counties, and we experimented with different types of plastic pipe. And the first 10-inch plastic pipe we ever decided to tie into a town and sell water to a water district was 10-inch. We tied into Stillwater and went west to that fish number 3 that sold recently. Real water dig number 3 that the city now owns. We ran 10-inch plastic pipe out there, and that was the first time we'd ever tried 10-inch plastic pipe on a project. That was it. It works great.
Does it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have photographs or anything from your work in what you were involved in? Do you still have any paperwork or photographs?
on the watershed projects and the involved Stillwater?
Mm-hmm.
that was all, I left all that in Perry, of course,
Mm-hmm.
when I left the agency. I may have a few old ones, but have lots of photographs statewide of the rural water districts and stuff that was built, but there was no reason for me to keep any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Is there still an office in Perry then that would have the
I'm pretty sure that construction office is
the
still there.
historical information and plans and things?
Or the state office here, I think, in Stillwater, which still has all those plans.
Mm-hmm.
And the plan book is about this, mostly about this color, and they're that big. They're not very big, and they have in the back of them, they have all of the plans of all the dams. It may be 20 pages of plans, and it's a small scale. They would have the big ones too, I'm sure, filed, but those books are available.
And how did your college education at OSU tie in with your career, and anything noteworthy you want to say about that?
Well, I think I mentioned in my previous interview that when I was state engineer for the Farmers Home, we dealt with private consultants every day. And I called a meeting, a seminar at the Student Union case study room one time. And it was by invitation only, just as consultant engineers that worked on water and sewer projects in Oklahoma. And I think I'm right. I read that in the paper. I still think I'm right. I think there was 81 private consultants that came to the meeting. 79 of them, or 78, were OSU consultant engineers. There were 3 that weren't, 2 from OU and 1 from MIT. I remember that. Mm-hmm. And we were just inviting all of them. I didn't realize till they showed up and signed their name. And they was all kind of glad to come back to Stillwater and have a chance to. That wasn't a big school then, but there was always jobs available. Still are today. Mm-hmm. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but there was a girl that's a friend of my daughter's. Last week, she's a graduate civil engineer, and she got registered, and she works in Tulsa. She wanted to possibly transfer or find a job in Oklahoma City. Her mother lives in Oklahoma City. I don't know her, wouldn't know if she came in the door, but I talked to her last week and set up an appointment in our office in Oklahoma City. So I work for a private consultant now.
Do you want to say the name?
I don't think I will.
Okay.
But she interviewed last Friday, and he offered her a job on the spot. Well, she couldn't take it. She called me last night. Mm-hmm. She couldn't really take it. She's still working in Tulsa and has a real good job, and she was a little surprised that he offered her a job on the spot and says, you move tomorrow and you're going to work. Well, the reason I mentioned that's always been you don't find a lot of civil engineers running up down the street. I mean, that's a small class. I mean, and regardless of what anyone says, that's a tough course to take. You know, you have to have a major in math and chemistry, minor in chemistry, and minor in physics and all that to get a degree in civil engineering. So there's not a lot of students in that. Never was. Mm-hmm. But historically, all of those guys became, what's the word? They all became successful, yeah. Mm-hmm. And still are. Just like in this case, can you imagine her going from Tulsa and just interviewing, and I don't even know her. Mm-hmm. And I asked the president of the company, the interviewer, see about going to work, and they offered her a job. And he was a little upset she didn't take it. Mm-hmm. This was Friday.
Well, what led you into civil engineering? As far as
primarily the money. I mean, there was lots of money available. But I had worked for the federal government. I'd gone to business college, and I was offered a real good job with the federal government in Woodward. Mm-hmm. That's my home county. And I'd worked there and in aerial photos and stuff. And I got drafted in the Army, and in the Army, that's what I did. But when it came out, I thought, well, if I go to school and take civil engineering, the Soil Conservation Service will pay me all summer as a as an employee at theirs. And so in the summertime, the day school's out, I can go to work on Monday and work until school starts the day before with the soil contractors on their survey crews. And it was really a good deal for me. I was on the GI Bill, and so they did exactly that. And when I was offered these jobs when I graduated, I just said, well, I told them I'd kind of like to go to Oklahoma City. And the reason I didn't want to get stuck in some little old town, I was single, in the middle of nowhere, and they gave me the plant engineer's job in Oklahoma City. That's where their headquarters were at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just kind of a natural fall in for me. That worked great.
Was it common for people to work in the summer and to have that hands-on experience like you had?
I think it's very uncommon. The Soil Conservation Service had about 6 of us scattered around, and all 6 of them were veterans. They all came out of the finally finished college at different times. But we usually on those crews had about 2 or 3 students that were veterans. They had about 6 or 7 crews around over the state, and I just happened to be on one that worked out of Clinton. And the reason is because I had an apartment out of Shattuck, and they did everything for me just really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And they were even nice enough when I was offered a job as state engineer Farmers Home. The 2 directors of the 2 agencies both said they'd pay my expenses. They welcomed me to quit one agency and go to work for another one, and it was all congenial. No bridges were burned.
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
Yeah.
It's that way.
And it was a nice move for me.
What have there been significant things that have changed in civil engineering since you started your career, and the way things are done or handled today? You mentioned, of course, the funding is different for a lot of the projects, the SCS, the watershed type projects and things. Could you mention maybe a couple other things or so that you've seen across your years of working that are different now?
I was talking to someone. I was talking to this girl that interviewed Friday. The Farmers Home and the Soil Conservation Service, Congress has pretty much dried up those programs. But the Water Resources Board in Oklahoma City has picked up, and they give lots of grants and loans now. So you go to a different funding agency, and the Department of Commerce funds lots of projects, even in rural areas. They funded like $12 million 2 weeks ago, and there's about 10 of them that are mine to do.
Mm-hmm.
I only work a couple days a week, but the big thing is, I think in the School of Engineering now, and all of this, they take all of the aeronautical, nuclear physics and all that stuff. I think that's all required now, and they didn't even mention it to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably harder now,
Mm-hmm.
and they're better educated. And I would imagine a lot of them go to work for the major corporations, especially the mechanical engineers.
Mm-hmm.
The old civil engineers are still the guy that's got on a pair of boots and he's out here staking a water line or a sewer line, and it's kind of a different animal. They told us at the time in college, I imagine it's the same. They have a big boost nationwide for mechanical engineers. Then it'll die down. Have a big boost for electrical engineers, and it'll die down. That big boost for chemical engineers. They said since day one, civil engineers seldom have a boost, but they're steady. Every day there's someone in Oklahoma. Believe it or not, every day in Oklahoma there's a town replacing all the water lines in town, because they were built in the 20s. So they're almost 100 years old. Mm-hmm. All the water towers, those old overhead water towers, were built in the 20s. And they're been replaced. And the old engineers that did those back in the 30s, the company that I'm with, it was established by an engineer in the 30s that did a bunch of those water and sewer projects for the WPA. Mm-hmm. Then he was replaced by a guy, the and that's all he did, and he's replaced by another guy in the same company. But I think the younger ones are, like I said before, smarter. They know a lot. They do everything on a computer. We weren't even allowed to take a hand computer class. We had to take a slide rule.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we couldn't have walked in a class with a hand computer at all.
Do students still know how to use the slide
I
rule?
don't think so. John Gage here in town, I don't know whether you know John Gage or not. His dad had an old Western store. He came by the coffee shop about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and his dad had a hawk shop back in the 50s and 60s. A couple students had hawked their slide rules. I still carry mine in my briefcase, but it's pretty nice. But he had these 2 slide rules, and he gave them to me over at the coffee shop. Well, I'm sitting here with these 2 slide rules. This was 30 days ago. I thought, what am I going to do with it? I took them down to the office, and we put them inside the office where people sit on a table like this. We just put them out on the top of the office as a show thing. And people come in and look at them, but none of the engineers down there know how to use them. You can go to class without one when I was in school.
You had to buy your own.
Had to buy your own, and they were like $25.
Oh.
And that was tough. I mean, that was tough. I decided I'd go to a class without one. I hadn't bought one yet. I was a freshman. I walked in, sit down, and you had to have your trig functions before you could work the problems. I didn't have a slide rule. How do you have to look up your trig functions? It was a trigonometry class, I suppose. So I just had to leave and go buy me a slide rule.
Do you still have the one that you used when you were in school?
Yeah, I took good care of it. I still keep it in my briefcase.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a nice one. I took good care of it. They all have leather cases.
Mm-hmm.
These have leather cases that John gave me, but the girls took them out. I know it's yesterday. Well, it was Thursday. I was down there. They were still laying out on the table. I think people pick them up, look at them.
When was the last time you used yours?
Well, I could say a long time, but there's another little story I could tell that really isn't had nothing to do with this stuff. But when the computers first came out, a couple of engineers and I, later on, we had 4 engineers on the staff at the Farmers Home at Stillwater. They called us to Kansas City to design a pipeline north of Auburn University, and they had about 20 engineers in the nation at this little, and they wanted us all to go set it up on a computer and tell them what size pipe to put. Well, Gene Womack was with me. He's an OSU grad, and he was working for Farmers Home at the time. We pulled our slide rules out. It took us about 10 minutes to tell them what size pipe they needed. They worked on that thing all day. They didn't get it set up for 4 hours in the computer to kick it out to see what size pipe they needed. And they were a little upset at us. They gave us a problem about 11 o'clock, and at noon we were sitting in the bar, and they didn't call us back in until 4. But those slide rules will actually tell you what size pipe you need with a certain flow and a pressure and all that. They read the. So I still carry it just kind of as a joke. But if I'm out in the middle of nowhere tomorrow, and 3 farmers come up to me in a church and says, we're going to lay a pipeline over here to so-and-so, what size do you think it would take? I pull out that slide rule and tell them about 2 seconds. And the computer one of our engineers in Oklahoma State take him 2 days to set that up and actually have it accurate to tell him.
Well, that's a pretty
There's
impressive
the
story.
And the reason for that is they don't ask you in the office. They ask you out in the middle of nowhere at a church if there's a bunch of them meeting. So I use it occasionally for that, but that's okay. It's they're outdated. Calculators are a lot better. Every engineer carries a couple of calculators in their pocket now.
Any other tools that they can't live without?
Well, I would think on a day-by-day basis, the one thing that you would need to know in the civil engineering business, a young engineer that's real hard for him to know, is if I was the engineer for 100 towns and water districts when I retired, if you walk into a city council meeting in any town, just name a town in Oklahoma, the first thing the council's gonna ask you is, we need this. How much is it gonna cost and where do we get the money? The young engineers do not know where the money is. And there's no way, I always tell them it'd take about 2 years of traveling with these heads of the Water Resources Board, traveling with the heads of the Department of Commerce, Farmers Home Still funds, big projects. We just closed a loan last week for a new sewer system in Langston. It's like a $7 million project. Farmers Home funded that. They still fund some big stuff. And you gotta know there's about 5 different piles of money available in Oklahoma to finance a water and sewer project. Very common to get a 100% grant. You gotta know where the money is. The young engineers in our office don't have a clue. And they wouldn't even think about going out and meeting with the community unless I went with them or one of the older guys. They wouldn't even think about it because they wouldn't know what to tell them. The most, like we talked down there, the most important thing we probably do, we know where the money is. And know where they can finance it, where the grants are, what it takes to get the grants. My partner and I kind of work, he's about my age, and we're both consultants. We have an office in Oklahoma City. We worked up about 6 projects 6 months ago, and we were notified last week that all 6 of them were going to receive a 100% grant. One of them is up in north of here in Noble County. It's a $380,000 grant. We're going to run a pipeline from Meadow Park to Glencoe.
Yeah.
And then they want to replace all the water lines in Blackburn and all the water lines in Skeety. And we applied to the Department of Commerce for that. Those 2 grants, they were both approved. They're meeting right now in Pawnee to see if they want to accept the money. The young engineers wouldn't have a clue. You got to know where the money is. That's probably the most important thing you do today. And it makes sense, doesn't it, if you was mayor of a town, say they elected you Mayor of Perkins or Ripley, and you moved in, say got to have a new water tower, how would you go about it? You got to call somebody. You got to say, how do I go about getting a water tower free? You know, it's because there's grants available for them.
So,
Tell people that's life in the slow lane today.
well, the knowledge base is so important, and obviously with your career and the number of years that you've been involved in this at the state level, I'm sure that that's a very valuable skill to have.
Like I say, if you're talking about me, if I would do it, I could give a presentation to a set of say 10 little towns get together somewhere, and asked me to come and speak at their luncheon on where this money is. I could do one a week. I was invited to do so many of them, I quit doing them because I couldn't get anything done. But that's the thing they like to know. And the mayor may use another engineer to do it, but a lot of the younger engineers would not know. They just don't get hired because they don't know how, they don't know where. And that's the only way you can do that. You just got to be around for a long time to know all the people and know where the money is.
You mentioned the water towers and the pipes and things that were built in the 20s and 30s, and how there's some deterioration, if I'm using the right word. Is there anything that concerns you or that you're aware of that related in that area that, I mean, that you would say you have some concerns about in particular, or you think that cities need to be more aware of, or communities need to be more aware of that maybe they're not?
Well, you all familiar with asbestos? Well, prior to about 1962 or 3, all of the major pipelines, including Stillwater water lines, were asbestos cement. They're today. They're sitting in the ground today. The DEQ and the state health department really would like to condemn all that. They'd like to have it all replaced, and so we replaced a lot of that. And the interesting thing about you go to towns, and especially in western Oklahoma, if you can visualize this, and I have to kind of use my hand, but all those old towns were built on the flat out in western Oklahoma. And they have a water tower downtown, got the name on it and all that stuff. All that stuff was built mostly prior to the Depression. So it was built in the 20s when times were good. The sewer systems, a lot of those were built during the Depression by the WPA. But going back to these towns, over the years, most of those little towns have grown 20%, a lot of them, and they built on a little hill. Obviously, this guy comes in, develops this little old 20 or 30 or 40 acre tract, built on a hill, and they got beautiful homes on this hill. They're getting higher and higher, and the water tower's not any taller. So the pressure's low, and they all want to say, hey, we got to do something here. We need a new water tower. Well, invariably, I tell them, what you got to do though, in that case, you got to tear this one down and build you a new one out here on this hill, and you won't have any water pressure. They don't want to tear the old one down. So if you give them a choice, almost invariably, they will build the new one the same elevation. That way, they don't have to have any different pumps or anything, and they'll float on each other, but don't increase the pressure at all. But invariably, they won't tear that old tank down. And a lot of them actually operating day by day on a little lower pressure than they really should. And they just need to replace that stuff. There wasn't any plastic. Plastics came on in the 60s. And they got ductile iron, cast iron pipe in the ground, and asbestos cement. Have breaks every day. And an interesting thing that the mayor will do, if he was mayor of Ripley, what you walk in and sit down, and the mayor will say, now the one thing I want you to know, I ran for office, and my platform, I will not raise water rates. Now what we need here is a new water tower, a new water treatment plant, and all new water lines. But I don't want it to cost us anything. That's the way they think. They're not saying the previous 25 mayors also ran on that same platform. They wouldn't raise their water rates. But that's kind of life in the slow lane. Well, we rattle on quite a bit about everything in the world but what we started to talk about, right?
I think we covered quite a bit here. I probably want to go ahead and take a drink of water there. I'll look over the notes one last time and see if there's anything that we might have missed. You might look over your notes there too that you brought.
Well, for my benefit to close it up personally, I tell people you couldn't have much better life than I've had as far as jobs. That area engineer's job at Perry was a great job. You know, I had a lot of freedom. I just came and went from town to town getting those easements and stuff. And then this job was, there'd never been a water district built when I moved to Stillwater. That was a Kennedy program that Johnson took over, and I got in on the ground floor of that. I was there 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then I've been with the consultant engineer on the firm in Oklahoma City since '84, 27 years. And now their big thing is with Walmart stores. They design Walmart stores and big developments, and you have all that stuff. It's all changed, probably to the better.
I think I've heard Senator Kerr was instrumental in.
He was a big instrumental in the lakes like the Corps of Engineers. Mm-hmm. He was a big Corps of Engineers man. Now he knew about the small watershed program and he backed it. Mm-hmm. But they give him credit for
Arkansas River
and all that. But
mm-hmm.
that was his big baby. Mm-hmm. But he certainly was for the small watershed dam program.
Do you think that Oklahoma, maybe because of of course the Dust Bowl was in the far western part of the state and the Depression, and do you think that played into the progressiveness, I guess, of Oklahoma with these types of projects?
I would think so. Because they started out there.
Mhm.
Like I said, the first one was Cheyenne. You can't get any further west and get more involved in the Dust Bowl.
Mhm.
I was born and reared out there. I remember people's asked me about, there's a new book out, I don't know whether you've read it or not. I bought it down in Hastings on the Dust Bowl.
Mhm.
I remember in the second grade, I couldn't see across the street of my hometown. I remember standing there and I couldn't see the businesses across the street. And the people that stayed pretty much became pillars of the community and got some money. The ones that left, and there was more of them left that stayed. But I remember people were going to California because I was in the second grade.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that if you have time.
You ought to read that book. Have you read it? It's a new book.
Is it Timothy Egan's book, The
Yeah.
Worst Hard Times?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, the couple, my hometown's Vicey,
Mhm.
and the woman that they're talking about, and the child that dies, and the child that was born in Boise City and all that, they live in Vicey to this day. He's the undertaker. And I went out there. Didn't I tell you about this in our conversation? I went out there a couple months ago. I got my picture in the paper again in Woodward for telling them. My granddad was one of the first settlers, and he was literally in 1892. And he dug a cave, and then I was born and reared there. And I was trying to say the people in that book, I know them personally, and they're still alive. The woman that was a school teacher died about 3 years ago, but her son that had the sister that died with, if you read the book, with pneumonia, dust pneumonia.
Mhm.
Yeah, he lives with us. He's the undertaker there now. He and I were both on the panel talking about what it was like to live out there at that time. I was pretty young, but I remember.
Mhm.
And my grandparents and my dad and uncle all stayed. They stayed. And then my granddad started buying land. I mean, after they all left, it's cheap.
Mhm.
But it's I don't know what you say about it. I just remember the mother putting sheets over the window that were wet. And I was telling someone at the coffee shop one day, you go to some kid's house and no one had any money really, and they would give you bread, butter, and sugar sandwiches for the kids to eat after school was out.
Mhm.
I think it's a great place to be born and reared. I wouldn't trade it.
Mhm.
And there wasn't 15 cents involved, and if you got a pile of kids in the car and went someplace, there wasn't a dime involved. You went to a swimming hole and started swimming and eating watermelons, and the farmers would give them to you, and they'd tell you to stop and get some roasting ears out of the corn patch and cook them, and you just have wiener roast almost every night and what have you, just the whole thing. When I go back to alumni, there isn't any big shots. You look a real stupid being a big shot, what was born and reared out there during the Dust Bowl.
Mhm.
But the people that stayed became fairly well-to-do. I mean, land was cheap and they bought it up. It didn't seem like a big deal to me because I was too young, I suppose.
Mhm.
It's hot all the time, I remember. Never did see it rain, but
Were you aware that people were becoming ill from
no,
the Dust
I do
Bowl?
remember people coughing and wheezing and all that. I remember that.
Mhm.
But I really wasn't paying that much attention to it. I can tell you one little story about that. I was probably 10 years old, and my dad had a business in town. He had produce and all that stuff. There was a guy drove up in front of my dad's produce, and it was about 8 o'clock at night. Typical, grapes of wrath. He had on blue overalls and a gray shirt, big tall guy. And he had about 3 or 4 kids out in this Model A. And he came in, my dad's name was Charlie. And he said, "Charlie, I can't make it." He said, I haven't had a crop in 2 or 3 years. He said, that place has got a good well on it. I dug it by hand. And why don't you go pay the taxes on it and it'll be yours to have. I'm heading to California. I always remember I could draw a picture of that guy. And he said, I'm leaving, Charlie, but you ought to go pay the taxes on that place. That's a pretty nice quarter or section of land. So I remember asking my dad when the guy drove off, I said, well, how much would the taxes be? And I believe he said about $40, maybe 42. And we talked a little bit about it, and he said, it's not worth it. I'm not going to go get $40 for it. Well, I tell people to this day, there's gas wells all over that 160 acres sitting out there. But I remember that guy, and he was really down, but he drove out in the worst dust storm you ever saw heading west in that old Model A with a bunch of kids in it. I have no idea what happened to him, but
Do you remember the name, the family name?
No, I just remember later when I got a little older where the 160 acres was, and it was out by a little town of Harmon, and I do remember that whoever bought it got gas wells all over it. But that's pretty common, stories like that.
Did you have any friends that left? Do you remember, did you know some people that left?
Yeah, we have reunions, and I go back and look at some of my first, second, third, and fourth grade pictures. Those kids just up and left. I remember when they left, and I hated to see them leave. Never did know what happened to them. I just look at those old pictures.
See, no, I didn't know. I didn't know your Dust Bowl stories.
I think we can quit.
Okay.
But I just had to myself go out there about 25 years ago. I bought 2 farms in Woodward County. And I just kind of felt like from my childhood days, the people that owned the land stayed and they had money. The renters left. And believe it or not, this one place that I bought 2. They've already called me in the last month to lease it for oil. I got half the royalty on both places. I didn't give very much for them because I bought them when it's cheap.
Did you know that Timothy Egan was here in April?
No, I didn't.
He did a wonderful program, and they interviewed him for that Oklahoma Horizon television show, which is taped locally. Wonderful interview on that show. We're actually going to have a book discussion over that book. I'll let you know about that. It's going to be at the public library.
It's going to be here at night?
Yes.
Didn't someone else in town have one, and I wasn't in town. Didn't he talk to some other group and
he came in April and spoke here at the library.
Oh, was it here?
We had about 170 people that came and heard him that night, and wonderful, wonderful presentation. Fabulous speaker. A lot of people bought his book that night.
The guy that's the undertaker in Visine, that is in that book, that his dad was undertaker in Boise City, and they had the child that died, all that. He called me, and he said, this guy had just written a book about it. You ought to go buy it. I bought it like immediately, the next day, and read it. Then I read it was about the time he was here, and I thought, I'd like to hear what he has. I thought it was great. And like I said, it's kind of interesting as the people that sent the book I knew personally.
Well, I could loan you a DVD. They did a whole program on the Dust Bowl, and they interviewed him, and they were talking about the Grapes of Wrath because that was part of that big community-wide reading program that we were involved in this spring. But we are we haven't put any information out yet, but we are going to have a book discussion over that book, and it will be open to the community, and it will be, I think we have that scheduled for early October. Now, he's not coming back again. It's very expensive, of course, to book him, to come to programs, but there were a lot of people that expressed interest in participating in a book discussion over that book. Especially after we went through the Grapes of Wrath and everything this spring, we had several people that requested that we have a book discussion over that book, The Worst Hard Time. So I'd love for you to come to that program. I'll let you know. I'll let you know what date it is and everything. It'd be great to have you there, especially since you grew up in that area and know some of the people that were in the book. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I need to read personally. I knew at least 2, 3, 4, 5. I know at least 5 people was in that book.
That are in the book.
Well, I know them yet today. I mean, we're friends. They moved to Vici from Boise City. Yeah. I don't know whether you want to record
Are we
this.
recording?
We are, I can stop it if you.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you all
Can
a
we
question.
keep it recorded?
Well, if you're gonna finish up, you need to.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you all a question about something similar to that had nothing to do with dust storm. So we can wrap this up. I just asked you a question. Over the past 4 or 5 years, and you may know more about this than Karen, they've had some guy here's had a program on the third man. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
You remember the old movie, The Third Man, that came out in the 50s? Well, there's some college professor here in town has said he wanted to have a roundtable discussion on the third man. Well, it's one of my favorite tunes. It's a song, but it had a movie. Orson Welles starred in it with Joseph Cotton in 1950. And I've always wanted to come over to that thing. And you don't need to record it. I'll tell you why I wanted to come over. I had my draft notice in the fall of 1950, and I was playing baseball at Woodward, and we were playing in Durant. We're going to play the Durant GIs that night. I was playing Woodward's baseball team, working for the federal government, Woodward. We stopped in Duncan and saw a movie, and it was The Third Man with Orson Welles. I go back and get drafted immediately, and so I go to Germany. I go to southern Germany. This takes place in Vienna, I believe. The movie does. Y'all sit sometime. I've got the tape. And I walk every little bar, cafe. I'm in southern Germany. I'm in Austria several times. Plays the movie. Plays the tune, The Third Man. It just come out in the United States. And it haunted me. I mean, every place I went in Europe, they was playing that because it was real popular. Well, I thought, I love that tune because here, that's all I heard for about a year. I came back and I bought the tape of the movie. Still have it. Mm-hmm. And I still occasionally get some old tape or something come on here. But this guy, for about 3 or 4 years, when school starts, he said, I want to discuss The Third Man at a meeting here on the campus. Mm-hmm. And I've always had something to do, but I'd just like to be curious it's a great movie. You never heard of it?
I haven't.
No, but we'll check it.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about it. Like I said, I don't need to tape this. The movie part of it has to do with this friend of his is killed. I mean, this guy's killed. Joseph Cotton goes over. They're buddies. Now, I'll try to. And they said, well, he was killed by a car or something out in the street. I don't quite remember. But some guy says, well, and the third man was there. And he goes, and he gets to think about it. He's getting ready to come back home. He's a playboy. And he said, well, they keep mentioning the third man. Well, Orson Welles and him had been buddies from way back. And in the United States. And he couldn't figure this out. Orson Welles ended up the bad guy. And he was the third man. But in the background, this song plays constantly.
Who recorded the song?
It was a Karasis, and it's played with a Zender.
Huh.
It's not a trumpet or a saxophone. And Orson Welles wanted it. The guy wrote the song for the movie. He wanted that it was a European instrument. Mm. And it's beautiful. Of course, I think one of the tapes I have on Guy Lombardo played it.
Were there lyrics for the song? There are.
But they didn't play them in the movie. It was just in the back. It was all in the background music for this murder mystery. Mm. It took place in Vienna, Austria. Mm. Well, it just so happened, here I am. I sit in the United States, and I kind of like the movie in Duncan. I go over immediately to where that all happens. Every restaurant in southern Germany, and Austria, and Switzerland is playing the Third Man theme. That's the name of the song, is the Third Man theme. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. But I just heard it constantly and constantly and constantly. And I'd be curious what this guy talks about it. That's
Do you know his name?
no, but they have a telephone number that you call, and they're going to have it, I think, over at the auditorium and all that. He may be gone now because I haven't seen it in a year. But I'm just going to come over and say, what would he have to say about that? It kind of haunted me simply because there I was thinking about the United States. I said, that's a good movie and I like it and that tune's pretty. And here I go directly to where the whole thing takes place.
Which Peter Rollins was a film studies professor here.
Could have been him.
You think it might be him?
Could have been him.
You know, or it could be someone in the music department doing it.
I just thought maybe you might remembered it, or because he had it every year. I think every fall they'd come over to the auditorium. We're going to discuss the third man. And I had parentheses around it, so I'm assuming it was that movie.
We'll have to check into that.
Last bar crash.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great story. Gosh,
The-
we can just talk all day.
The movie star that starred in that as Orson Welles' girlfriend died in about 6 months ago, in the last 6 months. The movie star that starred in that movie. Because I remember when she died, I didn't recognize the name, but they said she starred in the third. She was
I was unaware of that.
It's a great dance
That's a
tune.
good
We
story.
used to dance to it a lot.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and it's a great dance tune.
Okay. Great interview. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I told the boy brought me over here. I said, you got to learn one thing in life. Don't ever ask an ex-GI to tell you about his life story. You talk for 3 days and never quit.